Hi, and welcome to the AIA approved course, Access Control Hardware, Design, and Stakeholder Needs. In this course, you'll learn how property developers, owners, and managers review, select, and use access control hardware and software. Here at ButterflyMX, we have experience with the access control needs of properties of all sizes. As the providers of access hardware like keypads, vehicle gates, and smart intercoms, we're constantly doing business with and receiving feedback from property managers, installers, and other stakeholders, and we'd like to put our knowledge to work for you. In this guide, we'll help you achieve a better understanding of your client's needs by going over some access control regulations and concepts. This course will cover the following 4 primary learning objectives. Objective 1, understanding building standards and codes having to do with access control. Objective 2, reviewing stakeholder needs regarding access control. Objective 3, distinguishing between different access control models and when they should be used. And finally, Objective 4, exploring access control installation in both new developments and retrofits. Let's get started. Objective 1, understanding building standards and codes having to do with access control. Access control isn't just a convenience. You have to adhere to building fire codes, local laws and regulations, and more. Specifically, you have to be aware of standards like how electric locks should behave and how doors in a building should facilitate quick exits in case of emergency. Today, we'll review some standards that apply nationwide, like the International Fire Code and the International Building Code. However, it's always important to make sure to look over your local building codes and adhere to city and state regulations before you get started. In general, doors and locks need to display certain behaviors in the event of power outages and emergencies. Also, electronic locks may need to be disengaged at the direction of emergency systems like sprinklers or fire detectors. While electronic locking hardware is expected to manage access into a space, these locks should not interfere with egress and a quick evacuation in the event of an emergency. In fact, many jurisdictions require the installation of hardware that simplifies evacuations, like crash bars and other kinds of panic hardware. For example, the National Fire Protection Agency, or NFPA Life Safety Code 72162, states, when operated, the manual release device shall result in direct interruption of power to the electrical lock, independent of the locking system electronics, and the lock shall remain unlocked for no less than 30 seconds. In terms of any legal requirements to install access control hardware, that's a question that depends on local laws and regulations. For example, in New York City, certain residential buildings may be required to have an intercom system. One example is the New York State Multiple Dwelling Law, which states, every Class A multiple dwelling erected or converted after January 1st, 1968, containing 8 or more apartments shall also be equipped with an intercommunication system. But other city and state building codes may not have such mandates. Let's jump into Objective 2, reviewing stakeholder needs regarding access control. Here, we go over how access needs differ for property managers at residential, commercial, and mixed-use buildings. By understanding how management uses access control, you'll increase client satisfaction by answering many of their questions yourself. First, In a residential building, property managers have to manage access for tenants and their visitors. But as properties stay competitive by introducing amenities like gyms or co-working spaces, their access needs evolve. Along with amenity spaces, many residential properties are also offering secure package delivery options. These might range from purpose-built solutions like package lockers or package rooms to simply asking delivery staff to leave packages in the lobby or at a front desk. A resident moving into a development might receive keys for the building's front door, their own unit door, any amenity spaces, and the building's package room. It's management's job to ensure that each resident has access. Every property manager has had to let a resident in after they've lost their keys. But managers also have to distribute these keys when a resident moves in, and then collect them again once a resident moves out. On the contrary, in a commercial building, the relationship between managers and companies that lease space changes access control requirements. When a company leases office space in a commercial building, that company comes with its own set of access needs. Now, it's no longer as simple as handing out one key for every residential unit. You also have to ensure that every employee working for that company has access to the correct spaces and cannot access other floors in the building. Meanwhile, facility staff and repair workers might need building-wide access, necessitating a robust access control system that managers can use to easily issue and edit credentials. Finally, in a mixed-use development, residential and commercial tenants both occupy the same building. While you can take access control ideas from both types of developments, there's one crucial distinction. Just like you wouldn't want employees on one floor to be able to access another business on another floor, it's important that employees can't access residential spaces and vice versa. Next, let's explore the relationship between delivery couriers and your access control protocols. No matter the type of building you're designing, one thing is for certain. Building tenants will be dealing with high volumes of deliveries. Whether that's personal deliveries for a residential building or the delivery of industrial materials in a commercial building, managers need to safely and conveniently verify the identity of a courier before that courier is allowed onto the property. A recent solution has involved distributing temporary access credentials in the form of QR codes and pins to delivery couriers. With a QR code or pin, a courier can use their electronic credential to quickly enter a building instead of taking time away from a staff member. As you've seen, residential, commercial, and mixed-use properties each have their own unique access control needs and different types of building entrance to account for. And as for the hardware that actually manages access into doors, property managers have two choices: electronic or mechanical access control. Mechanical access control hardware doesn't depend on electronics. Think of your standard brass lock and key. And while it gets the job done in terms of securing a property, you might be missing out on crucial features like different types of credentials, higher levels of security, or computer-based management. On the other hand, benefits of electronic access control include computer and cloud-based management, higher levels of security, and access to a variety of credentials like PIN numbers or fobs. However, properties can't depend entirely on electronic access control. To account for scenarios like power outages or evacuations, electronic access measures also use built-in mechanical measures. As you might imagine, a property manager dealing with access for hundreds of residents or tenants has a lot on their plate. Luckily, advances in access control have made access management easier for tenants and property managers alike. You're probably familiar with access control hardware like keypads, intercoms, and card readers. But you might not know about the specifics of how they help property managers keep tenants satisfied. In the past, property managers would have no choice but to manage a large set of keys. Much of a manager's job was key management. In fact, the primary property manager responsibilities included issuing keys to tenants, collecting keys from tenants who are moving out, and replacing lost keys for tenants. But with the advent of keyless entry methods like PIN numbers or smartphone app-based access, key management has become much easier. Even when a property uses physical credentials like fobs or cards, electronics still help property managers out. For example, managers can reuse these credentials by simply reprogramming them. With electronic access, property managers can also handle a lost credential with more ease. If a tenant loses a brass key, the most security-intensive option involves replacing that lock entirely, which causes expense and hassle. However, if a tenant loses a fob or a card, management can simply deactivate that particular credential and issue a new one. And with the power of today's software management platforms, property managers can further reduce the chances of error and comfortably manage large numbers of tenants. Property managers nowadays can assign multiple credentials, like a key card and a PIN number, to the same tenant, simplifying the process of onboarding a tenant, editing their access permissions, and moving them out. While electronic access is convenient, property managers can choose from many different providers, and the same property might end up with keypads from one manufacturer and readers from another. In the past, this meant juggling software platforms and making sure every single device was up to date. Today, integrations between different devices and platforms are growing in popularity. In the early days of electronic access control, weekend access control was a common standard used by major manufacturers. But due to advances in technology, new standards support more features and higher levels of encryption. These days, many access control manufacturers choose to follow the Open Standard Device Protocol, or OSDP. OSDP is an access control communication standard developed by the Security Industry Association, or SIA, to improve interoperability among access control and security protocols. OSDP was approved as an international standard by the International Electrotechnical Commission in May of 2020. To learn more about OSDP, we recommend you visit the Security Industry Association's website at www.securityindustry.org. An OSDP device meets several rigorous standards, including AES 128 encryption and bidirectional communication between a reader and a credential. But even if two products are of different standards, you may be able to hire an access control integrator who can create purpose-built solutions for properties with differing sets of hardware. So, you've heard us mention the term credential several times. But what do we mean when we say credential in the context of access control systems? Put simply, a credential is the physical or digital entity that a person presents to gain access through an entry point. When picking a credential, you'll likely choose between keycards and key fobs, mobile-based credentials such as QR codes and swipe-to-open mobile apps, and biometric credentials such as fingerprint scanners. Let's take a closer look at the most common types of physical and digital credentials. First is the various types of key fob and keycard credentials. Key fobs and keycards are a common type of electronic credential, and the most common types of keycards are magstripe cards and proximity cards. Let's dive into how each of them work. Magnetic stripe cards, or magstripe cards, depend on millions of tiny magnets placed onto a card. When a property manager wants to program the card, they insert it into a card programmer that gives each magnet a unique polarization. Then, to determine if an access credential is valid, readers look at the magnetization pattern and allow entry if the pattern matches the one found in an existing database. Magnetic strips can only be interacted with one way. In other words, they're write-only cards that can unlock doors, but they can't store a record of entry events on the credential themselves. The next kind of key fob and keycard credential is a proximity card. Proximity cards, also called prox cards for short, use microchips and radio waves to exchange information between a credential and a reader. They're a little more sophisticated than magnetic cards. Prox cards use RFID, or radio frequency identification technology. An RFID credential uses radio waves to transmit signals between a credential and a reader. This means that prox cards can work from much greater distances. In contrast, you have to physically tap a magnetic stripe to a reader for it to work. Among prox cards, you can choose between passive and active credentials. The difference is that an active prox card comes with a pre-installed battery, while passive prox cards draw electromagnetic energy when a resident places them near a reader. Active credentials have more range, but they're also more expensive. So, what are the benefits and drawbacks of keycard and key fob-based credentials? While there are some slight differences in keycards and key fobs based on the technology that powers them, from a property manager's perspective, a lot of their benefits and drawbacks remain the same. For example, a benefit of keys and fobs is the ability to reprogram them easily. Let's say that a manager has just opened up a new amenity space, like a co-working space or a gym. If that manager wants to give access to a resident, they can simply take the key back, reprogram it, and grant access without having to give out another credential. In contrast, a mechanical system based on physical keys would mean that a property manager has to continually assign out keys to whoever needs them, and the risk of a tenant losing keys increases. A significant drawback of depending on fobs and cards is the risk of a tenant losing their credential. Depending on whether a property manager has gone with more complex credentials with features like longer range, replacing a lost key card, or a fob could get expensive. The next credential type is mobile-based credentials. A mobile-based credential is a wireless credential that residents can access using their smartphones. Smartphones use three main types of wireless signals to send information to readers: Bluetooth, Internet, and NFC. Here's how the three work and differ. A Bluetooth connection has a higher range, up to 30 feet depending on conditions and interference, and transmits data at a faster rate than its counterparts. But establishing a Bluetooth connection tends to use up more power. Internet-based communication relies on the smartphone's connection to the internet to signal the access controller to open the door, gate, or elevator. If the user does not have a connection to the internet, they will not be able to instruct the access control system to grant access. NFC stands for Near Field Communication. The range of an NFC connection is only about 4 centimeters, but NFC connections tend to be more secure. And given the ranges that NFC works in, the chances of an unstable or weak connection are low. Compared to key fobs and cards, mobile credentials have one clear advantage. Property managers no longer have to assign out keys or worry about replacing them. Additionally, many mobile-based credentials offer more features than just opening the door. Mobile-based credentials go hand in hand with mobile apps that allow tenants to send virtual keys to guests, open the door with a swipe, and more. However, mobile-based credentials aren't foolproof. While a majority of Americans own smartphones, there are still some tenants who won't be able to download the apps you need for mobile-based access, or tenants' phones might run out of battery, leaving them unable to use the phone-based credentials at the door. So, while mobile-based credentials may provide more features and higher levels of convenience, you might want to set up backup credential systems in case tenants can't use their phones. The last type of credential you'll likely choose from is biometric credentials. Common types of biometric credentials include facial recognition, voice recognition, fingerprint recognition, iris scanners, and handprint recognition. Biometric sensors capture thousands of identification points, whether those are the unique distances between people's facial features or the distances between ridges and whorls in a thumbprint. Then, the sensor compares those ID points with credentials stored in the system's database and grants access if there's a match. From a key management perspective, biometric credentials have obvious benefits. When compared to a fob or even a tenant's smartphone, there's simply no way for a tenant to misplace a biometric credential. However, biometric credentials have their drawbacks as well. Compared to mobile and fob-based access methods, biometric systems are more expensive. In some weather circumstances, like rain or snow, might interfere with a biometric credential being properly read. Now, we reviewed access control in terms of tenants and guests arriving to your property on foot. But what about the thousands of tenants who arrive via car? Offering robust vehicular access is key to providing a holistic access control experience. Many properties feature gates or parking garages to accommodate cars. However, what's the best way to grant access to a driver? And what's the easiest way for a property manager to manage access for drivers? Before electronic access, managers had to post a staff member at a property's entrance to manually verify someone's identity before they were allowed to drive onto the property. But today's credential options allow for more flexibility on the part of management. Some commercial properties allow employees to use their badges to scan in at the gate. However, the range of these scanners might pose some problems. An employee might have to get out of their car to scan their badge. This holds up every other employee trying to get in. Other access options for drivers include a sticker they can place on their windshields. That way, drivers don't have to leave their cars to present a credential, reducing safety concerns and the inconvenience that comes with a traffic jam. And the best vehicle access control solutions take it one step further, by offering a headlight sticker. This way, drivers that opt for tinted windshields, like those in hotter climates or who simply prefer privacy, can still reap the benefits of access via a sticker. However, properties that still prefer a human touch at their gate have plenty of options. For example, you can have drivers stop at a camera that connects to a security center staffed by a guard, and you can increase that guard's efficiency by allowing them to monitor the entire property from their command center. So, how do all of these factors relate to effective communication with stakeholders? Chances are, as an architect, you can expect to interact with multiple stakeholders during a single project. It's paramount that you effectively communicate with everyone involved in a project without compromising project quality or efficiency. Here are the 5 keys to effective communication with your stakeholders. 1. Identify stakeholders. 2. Prioritize regular and clear communication. 3. Manage expectations. 4. Negotiate and offer compromises. And 5. Balance stakeholders based on needs and importance. Let's take a closer look at each of these keys. Key 1. Identify stakeholders. Some of the stakeholders you might be dealing with include future tenants of the property, contractors, construction companies, and neighborhood residents. And each group of stakeholders has their own wants, needs, and goals. By identifying stakeholders and deciding which group might have the most influence over certain parts of the design process, you can do your best to balance competing interests. Key number 2, prioritize regular and clear communication. You can do this by keeping stakeholders in the loop during all aspects of planning. Instead of simply turning over completed plans for approval and editing, you can ensure stakeholder voices are heard by meeting with them and hearing feedback during the drafting phase. You can improve communication on your end too. Make sure your own team always has the most up-to-date specifications and that stakeholders are only looking at the latest version of your drafts. Key number 3, manage expectations. During development, you might run into cost overruns, logistical delays, or permit issues, and anything else that might unexpectedly come up will surely result in negative reactions for your stakeholders. But these delays might be opportunities to keep your working relationship with your stakeholders healthy. By keeping stakeholders duly informed, you'll ensure that none of them become dissatisfied with your work. You might even count on your stakeholders to remove key obstacles that arise in the future. Key number 4, negotiate and offer compromises. When a stakeholder has an idea of what they want to be added to the property, they might try to convince you to make a specific alteration or addition that might not be technically feasible. However, you may be able to turn this into a conversation about stakeholder intent rather than specific additions to your plans. And if 2 groups of stakeholders have competing visions for the property, you can do your best to accommodate both by hosting a joint negotiation. Key number 5, balance stakeholders based on needs and importance. While all of your stakeholders are important, it's not realistic for everybody's requirements to be represented equally. If you place more importance on permit holdups or on funding, you might give more weight to one stakeholder's needs. You might simplify discussions based on stakeholder needs by meeting with some stakeholders more frequently or having some stakeholders be more involved in the design and approval process than others. Or you could consolidate points of contact by asking a certain group to designate one singular spokesperson to reduce the chances of a miscommunication. Objective 3. Distinguishing between different access control models and when they should be used. Now that you understand the different types of buildings and their differing access control needs, you're in a great position to help your stakeholders understand the specifics of access control and help them decide which access control model is right for them. An access control model is an organizational framework that building owners and managers use to distribute credentials among building tenants. Under different models, things like the number of administrators and the criteria that administrators use to issue credentials change. There are 4 main access control models: discretionary, or DAC, mandatory, or MAC, role-based, or RBAC, and attribute-based, or ABAC, access control. Let's go over how they work and what kind of properties you could use each on. The first access control model we'll cover is discretionary access control, or DAC. Discretionary access control depends on one administrator who manages access permissions for an entire property. The benefits of discretionary access control include a high level of personalization for every user. However, this might become a downside if a property has hundreds or even thousands of tenants. So, you should recommend discretionary access control for smaller properties where an administrator only has to manage access for a few tenants. Another common access control model is mandatory access control, or MAC. A mandatory access system depends on multiple administrators who can grant, revoke, and edit access permissions. However, the lack of a unifying structure means that administrators might issue credentials in different ways or accidentally issue more than one credential to the same tenant. For larger numbers of tenants, mandatory access control might not be the most efficient option. However, mandatory access control is useful for small properties that don't need more complex access models. The third access control model is role-based access control, or RBAC. Role-based access control allows administrators to create different roles with different sets of access permissions. These roles have different levels of access and can be assigned according to the needs of tenants or visitors. For example, let's say a property manager of a residential building has created 2 roles, residents and staff. The manager can create the staff role and assign it a higher level of access permissions with access to higher security places like storage closets or IT server rooms. Role-based access simplifies handing out credentials, changing people's access needs, and revoking access if needed. Instead of building out a new tenant's permissions from scratch, an administrator can simply assign them an existing role. And with the right access control hardware, every piece of hardware on the property can receive that update immediately. So, a manager doesn't have to manually add or remove a specific PIN number from functioning on every keypad on the property, for example. Because role-based access balances flexibility and an ability to scale, it may be ideal for larger properties. However, there's still the question of manually assigning roles to every tenant. At properties where shifts between roles happen fast, managers might find a different access control model useful. The final access control model is attribute-based access control, or ABAC. Attribute-based access control counts on administrators who create and monitor tenant attributes. Then, as these attributes update in real time, the access control system decides which areas of the property they should have access to. But what's the difference between an attribute and a role? Here's what it boils down to. Property managers manually assign roles, while a tenant inherently has attributes. Let's say an employee just got a promotion, and with it comes access to more spaces inside a building. Let's explore what happens to an employee who receives a promotion in both contexts. In a role-based system, a manager has to manually reassign that employee's role. But in an attribute-based system, access control hardware and credential readers are sophisticated enough to monitor HR directories or databases and automatically update the community's access permissions to match. Other examples of attributes might include an entrance location, the door they'd like to use, the time of day, or even their IP address. As you can see, an attribute-based system removes a lot of the busy work from a property manager's life. But the real-time monitoring that attribute-based systems depend on may be expensive. This might make attribute-based access right for larger commercial or mixed-use properties with unique security needs and a larger budget. Effectively designing the architecture for access control can only be done when you ask and answer the right questions. Here are just a few of the questions you should ask during the design process. 1. What is the access control system protecting? 2. What is the level of security needed for the property? 3. How many access control users will there be at this property? 4. Is there an existing access control system installed? If so, what is the current credential system? 5. How many entrances need access control hardware at this property? And finally, 6. Does this property owner or manager have a preferred method of locking? For example, electric strikes or mag locks. Once you have these answers, you're almost ready to design architecture with effective access control methods in place. Let's jump in to our final objective. Objective 4. Exploring access control installation in both new developments and retrofits. You aren't always going to be dealing with new developments. In some cases, you might be hired to help retrofit an existing building, and that means dealing with that building's existing access control system as well. Some buildings may be using a wired intercom that depends on copper wire to transmit signals between a directory at the entryway to the units installed throughout the building. And in some of these retrofits, you might also be dealing with issues like broken directories or degraded wiring. While you might be able to repair an old intercom, that could involve ripping up floors and walls, repairing them again, and unnecessarily increasing costs. With modern access control systems, a property no longer needs hardware installed throughout the building and wiring to connect it. Modern systems send signals wirelessly. Other features include live video, remote management and unlocking, and temporary visitor access for delivery people. This concludes our presentation. Thank you for learning with us. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact us via phone at www.butterflymx.com or on one of our various social media pages.